Okay, good afternoon, good evening, and let me welcome you to Group A, Panel 2 of Building Bridges, Breaking Barriers, and our first exhibition mounted on viewing room virtual platform. The participating artists you just heard is Beth Fein, Keith Seaton-Wilson, and Howard Hersh. There will be a test at the end if you remember the names. We are proud to present a topic of ageism and aging that is worthy of exploration, reflection, and action. Ageism is a stereotyping and all discrimination against individuals or groups on the basis of their age, which may be casual, systematic. The term was coined in 1969 by Robert Neal Butler to describe discrimination against seniors and pattern on racism and sexism. Recent studies about ageism conducted revealed that about 82% of Americans who are 50 and older say they have experienced prejudice, bias, and stereotyping based on their age. Age discrimination remains a significant, costly problem for workers, their family, and our economy. Nearly 1 in 4 workers aged 45 and older have been subjected to negative comments about their age from supervisors and co-workers. About 3 in 5 older workers have seen or experienced age discrimination in the workplace. 76% of these older workers see age discrimination as a hurdle to find a new job. Another report found that more than half of these older workers are prematurely pushed out of long-time jobs, and 90% of them never earn as much again. The impetus for tackling ageism is a direct response to manifestations of discrimination that occurred during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, registering a surge in ageism in America. Sadly, it is a worldwide phenomenon. For us at Root Table, the undertaking of this topic is logical outcome of our programming and is also aligned with the mission of COVIA that calls for positive aging by cultivating healthy and engaged communities with a continuum of innovative services that actively support intellectual engagement. So this was my introduction, and I really love the numbers because they tell the story. And so you know that we are facing a serious problem that is worth our attention. Okay, so I am starting with Beth Fein, and I would like you to introduce yourself the way you would like us to know you, and also tell us if you have been or have exhibited with Root Table.
Hi, I'm Beth Fein, and I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I've worked in many media. I originally went to school and studied ceramics and photography, but I'm also been a performer and a dancer, so those things have crossed over into my work, and I work in any media basically that suits my project. I've only been to visit Root's Table. I've never exhibited before, so this is my first opportunity.
Thank you so much. Now I will continue interviewing you or asking you questions, and then we will move to the next and so forth. And And after I'm through with interviewing each of the artists, we will have a section that I call group questions. So each of you will have a chance to answer the topics that I'm raising. So right now I want to start with you, Beth, where I notice in your bio that you come from Hudson Valley. So can you please tell us something about your formative years there, because Hudson Valley has a connection, a very strong connection to San Francisco, California, the museums. And we know that Bierstedt and Cole and Durant were all came from Hudson Valley, which is one of the earliest, the first art movements. So tell us, like, living in this environment, knowing its significance, even today, it's still a very striving art community. So how did that impact you? And just tell us, did you have a good school?
I went to public school outside in Dutchess County, and we had excellent art programs. I had my first exhibit in first grade. I was very proud of myself to get a drawing hung in the hallway for the first exhibit. I had a very strong arts education in school, and I was in a very rural area. Now it's completely built up, but at the time it was very rural, and I went to school with farm kids. I don't think I had a lot of influences from the Hudson Valley in terms of the art world, except I would go to Vassar College for different performances and that kind of thing. But I would go into the city. It was less than 2 hours away, and my parents would take me in, and we would go to museums and concerts.
Well, thank you so much. Wonderful answer. So now I want to ask you a question about ceramics. I suspect that you know what I know, that ceramics is very much right now in the news, even though it has been around for centuries, if not millennia. And so according to the LA Times that I have just read, that there is really an insurgence in ceramics. So speak about your career as a ceramicist, and then let's tie it into the piece that is in the exhibition. The broken painting remains unfinished, 1987.
Well, I started to study ceramics. I think when I finished high school, I took some ceramic classes, and I ended up moving to California to go to California College of what was then Arts and Crafts, now is the California College of Art. And I studied with Viola Frey, which was fabulous in many ways. She was a person who believed in, if you had an idea, you just tried it, and it didn't matter if it worked or it didn't work. She'd have an idea and she'd come in and give us a demonstration of this brainstorm she'd had. And so I think it was a good education in the sense of taking chances and not being afraid. And I got right out of school and went to work as a ceramicist and made my living making hand-painted with underglazes, figurative ceramics. And then I also would always be doing sculpture in one of a kind, and this was an early piece.
Okay, so what really got my attention is the broken part that you're speaking about and unfinished. So I immediately connected it to Kinzugi, and which is the Japanese word for golden repair. And I know that you know about it, and so I want you to explain what that Kinzugi is. How did it come to your attention? what is the meaning and how relevant is it today, knowing that Kinzugi appeared in the Japanese tradition in the 15th century. Give us your perspective on it, or the bit of knowledge that you have.
Well, I was introduced to it when I was majoring in ceramics. And when you work in clay, things crack and things break. That's just a normal process. And so one of the things that I was taught about was this tradition of taking things that were either broken or with a crack, and you mend them together and you gild them with gold or silver or platinum. And I did that on a couple of raku pieces, but then it also taught me things happen. And this is the nature of clay and life. And no matter what kind of artwork you make or any path you take, you don't have control over everything. So things happen and you have to learn how to embrace it and find a new path with what's happening. So that's something that's followed me all the way through in my art practice.
Okay. We will maybe come back later on when we discuss the barriers, because I see when we tie it into the context of the United States, I see that this is a barrier. And then one more note that I want to mention has to deal with Marcel Dusan. And some of you will know very well the story of Duchamp's work, The Bright Streaked Bear, by her bachelors even, known also as The Large Glass. And the story here is that this glass piece, when it was shipped, it cracked. There were cracks in it. So that was way back in 1927. And I suspect that it was, I think it was maybe UPS, because they have been around since 1908 or something like that. But it seems like they survived that. So, so this is very interesting. And what is really telling is how Duchamp related to the fact that it was cracked. And to him, he thought that actually he was thrilled to discover that it was damaged. And he said that the accidental cracking finished the work the way that he would have never could have done it. So that's another lesson to learn. Okay, so now I see in the back of you, there are the two prints that we are also featuring in our virtual room. So please talk to us about printmaking, and when did you make that transition to printmaking? Anything that triggered it? What type of techniques you are using, and so forth?
Well, I actually didn't stay in clay for a really long time. I made a transition out of clay at some point because I had a couple of back injuries and it became increasingly difficult to make my living that way. And I kind of stumbled into printmaking. I was visiting a friend in Sonoma County who was taking a printmaking class, and I just went with her to the class, and the teacher handed me a plate, and I just had this immediate affinity to it. You could move it around in a way that reminded me of clay. And it had so many elements of chance and so many interesting things that I really immediately loved. And I started studying it. What you're seeing behind, I don't know how far you want me to go into it. I do a lot of photo etching, which these two prints are related to, but because of the pandemic, I haven't been working at Claude Art Institute where I would normally be printmaking just to stay safe. So what I did was I used previous print images. For instance, Dreaming Blue uses a screen print of a graphite image combined with photographs I've taken, and then I work on them in Photoshop. And in this case, I would have probably developed it into a printing plate or a screen, or I do screen printing, I do letterpress, I do etching, I do any number of printing processes, depending on the project. And so I prepared it as though I was going to do that, but I didn't have anywhere to print, or I didn't have access to the equipment to make what I would need. So I had this printed for me on aluminum, which was kind of an experiment. I did a series of prints that I call Quarantine Dreams, and they're partly subconscious mixed with prints, photographs, pinhole photographs, and sometimes things from my personal history or my family history.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And right now I will direct my attention to Keith Wilson. Keith, tell us about yourself. It's the same question. What do you want us to learn about you? And have you ever exhibited, or did you even know about Ruth Table?
I haven't been to Ruth's Table. It looks like a wonderful venue and a wonderful program. I'm very excited about that. You know, I've always found that Ruth Asalwan was such an important influence, you know, especially among the children and stuff in San Francisco. I have a little, I don't know if this will show up well, but this was a photograph or a drawing, a pencil drawing by Hassel Smith of Richard Hackett, who was Ruth's, they co-founded the San Francisco School for the Arts. And it's been kind of my friend in the studio for the this duration, because he's so kind of goofy and funny, and he looks like he's going to talk, and he also feels like he's ageless. So that is my connection. I hope to be able to visit at some time. So I was I got my 2 degrees in architecture at UC Berkeley. I did a lot of etching in the etching studio with Jim Risser and Sylvia Lark. I think I was even a TA at one time, and then also worked at Claude Institute doing etchings. I found architecture to be, you know, interesting. It's a fascinating profession. However, simultaneously through the years that I was practiced architecture, I was more interested actually in my paintings. And I actually used the watercolors as a way to both further the study of architecture that I was interested in, and also work as a kind of a propaganda or a kind of a covert argument, or, you know, visual argument for an architecture that needs to be, you know, interesting and hopefully colorful and informative and inspired by traditional architecture. So I, after a while, I stopped being, you know, practicing architecture and just painted full time. But my little watercolors that I, you know,
we will get to your watercolors.
When that was in the exhibit, you know, really, in terms of the life of, you know, your life of being a painter, they always continue with me, even though a lot of them were done 40 years ago. And I have a lot of them, and I show them from time to time. I've continued painting. Now I'm in oil, and it's an entirely different way to paint, but I don't have the architectural emphasis any longer.
Okay, so my other question is, since you said that you spent years in Berkeley studying there, and if you were in Berkeley during these years. There is such a thing as called the Berkeley Art School effect. And we know that in the Bay Area, San Francisco, there is also another school, the San Francisco Art Institute, and they had a very different approach to teaching art, and it's a different school. So I definitely want you to talk about that particular effect, even though maybe you must have experienced Hans Hoffman and knew how he was teaching and so forth. So tell us about what you can share with people who don't know about Hans Hoffman and his impact on the Bay Area. He came here in the 1930s from
Germany. There's a woman talking now. It looks like the hostess.
I would, the architecture school and both and Kroeber Hall also are across the street from the old art museum. In both programs, you spend most of your time in the studio. So for nourishment, I had all my, a lot of my meals were over at the art museum in the Swallow restaurant down near the Pacific Film Archive. So you get dinner and then go see a movie, and that was your break for the day. But in making the journey from across the street, I would go through the Hans Hoffman Gallery almost every time I'd visit. And I was like every day, maybe 2 times a day, and sometimes I just observe them in a peripheral way. Just they catch my eye. But a lot of times I just stop and you just see the energy that Hans Hoffman would put in to his work. And he did them rather quickly. And he did them with huge amounts of, huge quantities of paint. So, it was always very inspiring to me. And also, although I've got to admit, a lot of Hans Hoffman's work I don't like. I mean, I don't like, I wouldn't, it's just not something I like, but I can learn a lot from. And so that's what I did. And especially if there's a painting that I didn't like, over time, I was more interested in why I didn't like it, or what I felt was kind of abrasive about it. And many times it was the color, its color choices. But then the more you walk, the more you think about it, the more you learn about color. And you also learn about motion and depth and just kind of the energy to make a large scale work. So I've always stayed, close to watching Hans Hoffman's work. I would prefer Diebenkorn if there was a huge museum full of Diebenkorn. I'd go live there, put up a tent or something. So
okay, so now let's show your 2 works that are in the exhibition. Rita, can you show the, yeah.
There we go.
Okay, so you started talking about that, and I would like you to speak about the inspiration here. Are you doing it from memory, imagination combined? And I know that the colors, and you also had those gilded, the gold leaf, how does that mix? And you have watercolor and India ink. Do they mix? And just speak about some of the techniques and the imagery.
Well, I think in this work you probably picked, if I could say, one of my favorite paintings, because it's kind of a culmination of probably thousands of paintings that I painted. They were all painted from my imagination. I would just make them up, as Paul Klee would say, you know, taking a line for a walk, but, you know, it's almost like the line took me for a walk. And it just, you know, as I drew, I would start with a very, just a pencil drawing, and with a very fine, like a 9H pencil in a lead, you know, architect's lead holder. So the line was more of a indentation in the watercolor paper. And so they would just kind of come spontaneously. I'd sit down and start drawing. And then over time, I would come back in and then paint with watercolor. And that was a very time-consuming process. And these paintings are quite small. I was very influenced by medieval paintings and icons, and kind of the spiritual qualities of gold, you know, real gold, and also the black, the India ink. The title of this painting is The Ascent of Architecture. And the subtitle is All Good Architecture Goes to Heaven. But the point is that it's architecture that's kind of rising, and it's ethereal. I've always also been interested in celestial architecture, not as a belief system, but as a boy, the Jehovah Witnesses would come to the door, and they'd give me these books with these fantasy architecture in them that must have had an influence on me. And then there's the stories of streets of gold, and you know, these. I always felt that celestial architecture didn't have people in it, because they were kind of spirits wherever the celestial realm is. So it was this constant kind of desire to make space and make architecture, and drawing from my memory of travels well, actually, I just being on the Berkeley campus for you know, probably 8 years, just wandering through the plazas and the house and the clusters of buildings and the space in the gardens had a great effect on me. Yeah. So there's a very I felt these were very, for me, they were very spiritual paintings. And also they were done kind of to make up for the fact that I felt that architecture really lost its soul. You know, it lost its purpose, and it just became functionary and solving problems and solving the egos of the architects. So, you know, it was a great period of my life. I can't paint like this anymore because I simply don't have the eyesight. This painting is on about 4 inches, or maybe I think it's like 6 by 9 inches. I think also, not that it's a bad thing or a good thing, having these paintings, you know, although I had shows and exhibits and stuff like that, and, you know, sold a lot of things over the years, they never had a market because they were so small. There's interest kind of in them now because people are going back to looking at small things like cell phones or iPhones and you know, computers, and so they're used to being kind of into that intimate level of viewing. Okay. So anyway,
let's move now to the next painting. Rita.
There we go.
Wonderful. So the Forest Houses series, there are numerous of them. So can you talk about that transition to oil on linen, and what is this series about?
In many cases, I've done larger paintings that are quite complicated. And then after they're done, I start looking at them and I see other paintings within them. So I go through and I try to find the kind of the essence or kind of points, nodes of kind of special composition and interest that I couldn't do from the start. So this was a large painting, and it's actually referring back to architecture again, and it's a kind of the houses that you see in the rural areas where you're walking in the woods, and then all of a sudden you see the edge of a house, or the way the light hits it. So that's from this series. So the large painting, I cropped out, I think 4 or 5 different paintings from this, and then painted them. The advantage is that then I was no longer having to deal with subject. I was no longer dealing with making color choices or form choices. I could just simply focus on mixing the paint and painting it. And I got to say, these are they're impasto. They're thick. They're done with a palette knife, and they're really influenced once again from Hans Hoffman. Lucinda Barnes did a wonderful exhibit of Hoffman's at the Berkeley Museum a couple of years ago. I went and saw it, and was really, wanted to get back into dealing with thicker paint and getting away from kind of the thin paint that is thinned out paint that has always been on my oils because of the time, 35 years doing watercolors. So although I'm not doing big gestures like Hoffman, and I'm not doing kind of mixing the paint on the canvas, there is I'm working with the push-pull principles and the rectilinear shapes, and also the kind of the echo of architectural form.
Okay, so now I want to move quickly to Howard Hersh, and as I mentioned, we will have group questions, so you will get to answer more questions as a group, and we will feed on each other. So Howard, the same question to you is, how do you want to be known? What type of, what do you want to tell us about you?
For me, definitely nature and nurture has played a big part in my life as an artist. Going back 3 generations to my grandfather, he came to this country from Romania at 12 years old with his sister. They were both left in America. The parents had to return back to Europe because they didn't have the entry fees. In any case, my grandfather somehow managed to make a life in New York, ended up in Chicago at the Art Institute. And I do have pictures of him there, like over 100 years old with his smock, and it's very inspiring. So as he grew older, he had a family, developed a tailor business, and was still making art. His health was failing quite a bit, and the doctors told him he had to give up one thing or the other, the art or the business. So unfortunately, he piled everything, all of his art supplies and finished work, in a pile in the backyard and burned them all. And not that long afterwards, at the age of 44, died. So when I learned that story, it left quite a mark on me, to reinforce the idea, you better do what you love, because life is short and it could really affect how it all plays out. My father also made art his whole life, and in fact is in the meeting tonight. He's 97, and he made sculpture his whole life. So then moving up to me, as a kid, really I drew a lot and made things with my hands. And those 2 things were the only thing that ever interested me. Okay. Although in those days, in the 50s and 60s, being an artist, a studio artist, was really not an option, at least known to most people. And I was not interested in being a teacher, which was really what most artists have done. So I continued with art. I went to junior college for a year as an art major, knowing that really I had no idea how I could proceed forward. Miraculously, that was, or as it turned out, it was the 60s, and counterculture and those kind of developments became more important to me.
Okay.
And I struck off, and that was kind of my next phase of education. And it wasn't until my early 30s that I really felt the pull of fine art coming back into my life.
Okay,
and
so this is the time that I want to talk to you about when I met you, you were very much into encaustic paintings.
Right.
So I want you to talk, to say something about encaustic and also about your painting. And I know that you had a very long career with encaustic. So tell us about the painting and the technique and so forth.
Well, I started in actually 1985 painting full time, and that was with oil paint. And every year I would go to the Chicago Art Fair in the spring, and it was very inspiring to me as a young artist. And in those days, the art world was very exciting. So 2 years in 87, I saw a painting at the art fair, and I was very attracted to it. And I found out with research that it was encaustic. I'd never heard of it. I did a little homework and was fascinated and just jumped in, bought some supplies, and really, I was living in Santa Fe, and for, I'd say, 5 or 10 years, I was the only person in town that did encaustic, especially on a large scale. So it inadvertently really helped my career as far as standing out from others. And I worked with encaustic pretty much straight through the 80s, 90s. I quit in the mid 90s, transitioned to acrylic, and then in early 2000, I was encouraged to pick it up again, and I did, and had quite a time in the early 2000s with it. I spoke at encaustic conferences, and really that is probably what I'm most known for, is the encaustic paintings. And just as an end note, I stopped doing it again. It was about eight years ago. And I think I'm totally done with it this time, but who knows?
Okay, so now we are going forward, and I want you to talk about the other works that are in the exhibition, and you call them, they are like your structural paintings, and you have been doing them for a while. So I would very much like you to talk about how did it come about that you are doing the blurring of painting and sculpture?
I think it came about really, well, first of all, I love working with my hands. And when I'm painting, I'm not really rendering, I'm just using paint. So art making has always been pretty physical. And I enjoy doing two different bodies of work at the same time, whether it's two different mediums. In this case, a little less than 10 years ago, I started thinking more about dimensionality and paintings as objects. And it developed into really two specific bodies of work. My flat paintings, which are now acrylic, and the structural work, the wall sculpture with exposed wood framework. But they're both series are about structure. They either depict structure as a painting or they are structures physically. So I approach structure a couple different ways, and it makes people think about structure. Remember, it's a noun and a verb, so it's a ubiquitous and very deep subject, and it fascinates me. Similar to Keith, you know, I have an interest in architecture, so that that definitely influences, especially the 3D work.
Okay. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that also seems like this is one of your newest one, and there is I love the personal story that is attached to this.
Yeah.
And would you like to share it with us?
Sure. Well,
that special commission, that special.
Yeah, right. There's a spot in our dining room that's had a piece of mine for I think about 5 years, and my wife Joyce has always been eyeing different pieces for that to replace it with. And finally, when I started this particular series, this Roundabout, I just went ahead and said, okay, I am actually going to make a painting for that wall. You don't have to try to pick one and talk me out of it. I'm committing to it right up front. And I did. And after quite a bit of time working on it and fooling with it, it was accepted. So it now happily hangs in our house, and everyone's pleased. So
I really love it. It's like it's a work of love. I really was very taken by it. And when I saw it, I asked you for it. And here we are. Thank you very much. And thank you, Joyce, for allowing us to have it in our viewing room.
I'm proud to show it. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. We are very happy with that. So now there is a point where you are saying, well, basically what I want you to share with us is your philosophy of art, and what you say about that, as you also say in one point that you are not an artist, you are not a painter, you are a maker of objects, so something like that. So can you elaborate on that?
Am I still on?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
I know that you are very philosophical, so I want you to.
Well, you know, yes, I am very philosophical, and again, that's in the blood too. My dad has a degree in philosophy, so but I also, the flip side of me is I love working with my hands, and I love just turning my mind off. And I think that's part of the appeal with the wall sculptures that I've been building. They're, to a lot of people, they would be tedious and, you know, a lot of work. And I enjoy that. It's a nice counterbalance to when I'm just pushing paint around and making more on-the-spot decisions. So yeah, I just love, I come into the studio and I just pick up the last thing that I was doing the previous day, and it's one continuous kind of a development for me. You know, it's okay. A journey.
So this is the point where I want to to discuss, to bring in the group. And another question that is for all of you to respond is about color. We touched a little bit about it. So I want to ask Keith about, he talks about when we had our conversation, so we talked a little bit about Diebenkorn and we talked about Paul Klee. And I know that you have a special relationship to Paul Klee. And I'm interested in Paul Klee because not long ago we had the Bauhaus exhibition. We know how Paul Klee was very influential. And I'm very pleased to discover that he has been also influential here in the Bay Area when he was still alive and even afterwards. So tell us about your relationship to these two artists that are really very influential in the Bay Area. Diebenkorn and Paul Klee.
So me?
Yes, Keith.
Yes, I probably when I was 13 or so, a neighbor who was an art teacher looked at my drawings and said, oh, your work looks like, you know, Paul Klee, and gave me a couple of books. Okay, and so I started reading them, and they just made sense because I was not a you know, I always worked internally, so, and I was very abstract, and I was never you know, I never win the contest in art school for making renderings that were realistic. So there was a kind of a lifelong interest in Paul Klee because, you know, not in copying his work, but in reading his work and his comments. And then later on, you know, of course, Diebenkorn, and actually what it might seem as an architect that the his later work, you know, is very structural, would be of interest, but I'm very interested in his work in the late 40s and you know, right before he went into figurative work up to about 53 or 54, because I find that there's a randomness that I can read and I can learn a lot from, and it's a way of seeing the world, you know, through drawing and painting. And it's kind of a closed circuit. So I've always been very fond of that. In terms of, I mean, I've always learned a lot about it. So in terms of color, I've always felt that, you know, there's color theories, and I have books and books on that, and I've studied it a lot. But when I go to mixed color, I ignore all that because I kind of am more interested in the non-theory colors, the colors, the tertiary colors that occur. And actually, I've always spent probably more time mixing color than I have painting, because you know, there's a certain joy. Maybe it's like cooking or something, and you make it work. And I only mix small areas of color at a time. I don't have pots of paint that I just use, even though a lot of the paint, the colors look similar. Every little cell or every little group of coloration is somehow unique. So it's a very and there's a lot of failure, and once again, like in looking at Hans Hoffman's paintings at the museum, I'm interested in what doesn't work and then modulating it so that it doesn't fight each other, but it still has you know, creates an individualistic energy of each color. So anyway, that's, okay. I have kind of anti-theory on color, and that's what I pursue. Not that I don't know what.
Now I ask you a question about Diebenkorn, so please say it succinctly because our time is running.
Yeah.
So I want you to just say about Diebenkorn, because I see some sort of a maybe effect on you.
Well, with Diebenkorn, I've like I said, I really like the early drawing, very abstract work, and I like the awkwardness of it. because I haven't seen that before. You know, he's not doing images that are familiar, and so visually you can learn new ways of seeing things by looking at his early work. Anyway, I have he didn't write very much, and the stuff that's written about him is usually pretty repetitive. But if you just read his drawings and read his early work, for me, it's a great text, and it's a great learning experience.
Okay, so now let me move to Beth. And Beth, you are dealing with printmaking. And so I want you to talk about some of the challenges of using color in printmaking.
Well, I'm a very intuitive color person. I should study color again, but I just don't. I like to, sometimes I will look at how to mix a certain color or going towards a certain color. But a lot of it is very intuitive. It depends about the emotion of the piece. And my work usually has, even when it's very minimalist, which is not what I'm showing here, but it usually has a certain kind of passion about it. And that's where my color often comes from. It's just intuitive and depends what I'm thinking of while I'm making that work.
Okay, so the same question about color. And I know that you have a special approach to color. You also have been doing a lot of black and white. So please elaborate on that, going from black, white to color or vice versa. And so explain it to us. Howard?
Oh. The way I've used color has always been pretty monochromatically, mostly warm colors, but also very deep indigo, almost black. But lately, I think coinciding with more interest in the structural, the wall sculptures that I've been building, I've been doing more black and white. And it seems the blackness, I think, takes associations away and helps focus on just the form and the objectness of the piece. I also happen to just love the look of very reflective black. It's actually, to me, more light than a white painting. So, so I bounce around back and forth. I enjoy doing both.
Okay, so now I am coming to another theme, and that really is the main theme of our exhibition, and it's about ageism and aging. So I just have some fast facts, and it's like 10,000 people are turning 65 every day. The fastest growing age group is women 85 and older. Life expectancy of the United States has increased from 45 in 1900 to 79 in 2000. This is something to keep in mind, and our federal policies should be reflecting that and see what happens. So now another question, and here I have, I want you to speak a little bit maybe more from your experience. And here is, who is afraid of aging? That's my topic here. A heading. So 3 painters come to mind: Giorgio, Pablo Picasso, and Claude Monet. And O'Keeffe is best known for depictions of flowers at close range and the southern landscape. In her later years, she was particularly prolific, and the year before her death, she was awarded an award. And then I think, yeah, the year before her death. Then we talk about Picasso, who was really one of the most influential artists in the 20th century. He continued to paint almost to his death at the age of 91. And then we have Monet, who changed the world of painting through his focus on form, light, rather than realism, sparking the new artistic movement known as Impressionism. He continued painting until his death in '86. So I am bringing this up because it's definitely inspirational, and that's what we are trying to prove here, that creativity really has no bounds and it just keeps growing. So here is the question to you is, speaking about age, art, creativity, maturity, curiosity, where do you get your inspiration from? What is the advantage of getting older as an artist? Please share this with our audience and beyond. So Howard, I will start with you.
I have a pretty positive outlook on aging. Actually, on ageism. I personally have not experienced ageism. I also think because artists are self-employed and alone in the studio, we're our own worst enemy. I mean, we don't have people lurking over us. So ageism for me, again, has not been an issue. Aging, I'm finding is not so good. I mean, I'm a healthy person, but things have been coming up more and more, and I'm becoming more aware of, my limitations physically.
Okay.
But creatively, I'm just, cruising away at my speed and working on getting better.
Okay,
better.
wonderful, wonderful. Now I want to turn to Beth, and I know that we spoke briefly about your experience in artist in residency places, and maybe you had also you are teaching younger people. So how does ageism manifest in those settings?
I think sometimes you find that people who are totally able-bodied and have no difficulties with anything, like as your sight gets worse as you get older, or maybe you don't hear as well, or you're physically can't do certain things. I think sometimes in artist residencies, it just depends where it is and who's running it. Sometimes that really gets ignored, as opposed to racism, which is a big topic now, and a lot of other things. I think the fact of people having limited ability, you're not in a wheelchair, but maybe you can't pick up the weight you could before, different things. I think those things come up, but as far as being an artist, I just feel like the more I work, the more ideas I have, the more I want to work. And I have an aunt who's a surrealist painter, and she's still painting at 101, and she paints at least 3 hours every day. And she's my total. I keep my eye on her. She's planning on being here till 104. I'm going to be right behind her. I'm going to at least 104. So.
Okay. So now, Keith, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, actually. I stopped being a watercolor painter probably when I was about 58 or so, and I moved over to Marin from Berkeley, and I got interested in oil painting, and basically I went to a Gerhard Richter exhibit at the San Francisco Museum, and all of a sudden it hit me, if I want to kind of go forward in the future, I needed to kind of make a bigger, stronger statement than just small watercolors that I've been doing for 30 or 40 years. So I actually went back to, I went to college in Marin. I took 4 courses of oil painting from Chester Arnold, who I actually knew from, showing in North Beach in the 80s. And it was great to be back among younger painters, although there were a lot of people my age there in the classes. But it was just kind of energizing, and so it was starting to paint oil at 58 or so. It was a real challenge. Chester was a very good teacher. During that time, I also had dinner with Jim Melchert, and kind of told him about this big adventure of changing from oil to from watercolor to oil. And he said, well, and I told him I was just turning 60, and he said, well, you have to, the 60s could be the strongest part of your life, because you had a lot of things resolved, or you kind of know where you stand in the world. And, your responsibilities are kind of different than they used to be. So it can be the most creative time in your life. And I've got to say that it was very great advice. It gave me incredible energy to get through, the learning curve of changing to oil. And, I don't see any end in it. Mike, getting back to ageism though, I've always kind of felt outside of things, because I've always done, the paintings I want to do, not necessarily what I feel is, part of the current thing to paint. What concerns me is the painters that are aging and maybe passing away, and they have huge bodies of work that are just stuffed in closets or garages or stuff like that. There's no one documenting that, or there's no way to, they basically just kind of don't exist anymore, because they've passed away, and the art world's passed them on, and they have a lot of valid years of work that we can learn from and enjoy. And I just don't know. It seems like support at that level is very important, to document and give them a little website that shows their work, so that future on there's a record of their creative contributions to our community and our world. So anyway, that's my concern about ageism. You reach a certain age, if you haven't made it, then you're kind of put in the dumpster and they move on to somebody else. So that's kind of
just a little bit though of sometimes, if you're lucky, maybe we will all be in that category. Sometimes it seems like galleries get interested when you get old enough. You know what I mean? If you
especially when you die, because they get very interested.
Yeah,
they don't have to deal with the artist anymore.
Yeah. Excuse me. Okay, so now my last question before I open it to our audience, to the Zoom audience. I want to ask the overarching question that deals with building bridges and breaking barriers. So, let me ask the two gentlemen first, because you are in architecture. So it doesn't mean that you have to build a bridge. I want to know how your mind works when I'm talking about building bridges, and what type of bridges do we need to build in order to make a difference in our very polarized world. And can artists actually be a good example in terms of building bridges and networking?
Howard Hersh or me?
Go ahead.
Howard,
okay.
Go ahead.
I'll say that I've always found art to be a bridge builder, because it's even if someone doesn't like your art, or they don't want to read about your vaunted opinions of what you're doing, there's something they can respond to. And in where I am up on the Sonoma coast, there's a big range of people. So I do open studios every year, and so there's a lot of people that come, and you know, a few years ago I was showing, you know, mostly just painted grids, and a lot of people that maybe, you know, don't have the relationship to art that I have. They saw things like G's Bend quilts, and you know, there's a whole way to communicate the work with people that were, you know, they didn't see the ocean there, that and they didn't see the you know, the surf or the sunset, but they saw some very abstract paintings that they connected to, and so over time, you know, you keep running into these people, and they share things with you that they've seen or they think relates back to the work, and vice versa. You can see other painters and artists' work in the area that has you know, strong ways in which you can connect with them. So I say that building bridges with art is very important, and you know, I think for some people to relate to abstraction, that's difficult. But in my earlier work with the architectural images, it was very open for everyone to interpret it and you know, get something away from it. Although for me they were very abstract paintings. And I don't know how many people told me that, oh yeah, I've been there. And it's like, yeah, it was in my head. I don't know how you got there. But anyway, I'm glad that there's always been a dialogue that can develop, and it happens because of the open studios and the painting and their relationship to the community and everyone. So,
Howard, thank you so much, Keith.
I'm going to talk about building bridges in a different way, and that is like internally, because it's hard to affect things outside of ourselves. But as artists, we have total control of what we're doing and what we're making. So to me, building bridges would just be improving the flow of ideas, and as they translate into my work more efficiently, you know, that can communicate better and connect with the people that can receive the work that I do. So it's, for me, it's internal, but it is an important thing. It's part of developing as an artist.
How about you, Beth? What do you have to contribute to the topic of building bridges and breaking barriers?
You know, there's two elements for me. One, I do residency. I am an artist in residence at Claude when I get back there soon, and I'm going to do another residency this year. I love the interaction with the other artists, and particularly young artists. And at Claude, I'm always asking anyone if they need any help when they're new and coming in. But I also spent over a decade of my artistic practice with a public art project that included people all over the world. And it was about making art accessible to people. And I started it in 2005 before YouTube and social media. It was very analog. It started out as a very analog project. And it ended up on 7 continents. Anybody could do it. It didn't cost any money. You could just decide to participate and let me know. And then you, it was a dance project. You would stop and dance in a certain location and send in a picture, tell me what it felt like. It could be anything. And that was a fabulous project that I stopped into. The last one was 2016. But right now I'm thinking about ways that I could pass along those ideas of making connections to other artists. So I'm thinking, you know, toying with different ways I might be able to do that, which might be an artist book, or I'm not really sure, but it's something I'm talking about with people who are still in touch with me, and they write to me about that project and say, couldn't you do it again? Which I'm not going to do, but I'm interested in those bridges between very diverse groups and people of very different ages and backgrounds. I think it's really interesting in art, no matter whether it's you're making it in your studio and then showing it or whatever, it does make connections with people. It does cross those bridges.
Okay, this is really a good point to start to remember that we really need to reach out to a diverse communities, intergenerational, because that's the only way we will be able to overcome these barriers and really break through.
Absolutely. Well, we're so proud to, this is our first exhibition, online exhibition that we've done so far. We have the second part of this series open next Thursday. So we're really proud to open this year, the exhibition year, and the virtual exhibition program with this very important exhibit that's Building Bridges and Breaking Barriers, and a wonderful group of artists that we're so proud to exhibit and have in our fold. And yes, this exhibition so far has been viewed by over, it's over 1,000 people. As far as I think the last time I checked, it's over 1,500 people. So, and that's, that makes us proud. We received a lot of positive feedback and comments from our audience, from not only from the Bay Area, from across the country, from all over the world as well. So people are really interested in the message and in the works that are being exhibited. So that makes us very proud. We're looking forward to the next part. Okay.
Anybody has questions or want to make a comment? Okay, so if you don't, I just want to thank you for spending the afternoon with us, giving us the privilege to delve deeper with panel 2, Group A. As Rita has mentioned, Group B will open on March 18 and runs through May 13. We will have 2 panels with them, and also divided into 2 groups, 3 and 3. And we have very interesting and artists who deal a lot with technology and also bridge and intersect between art, technology, and science. So it will be very interesting. So I want to let everybody know that this exhibition really is to call attention to the power of creativity as a way to build bridges and break barrier, to promote visibility of older adults and recognize their continued value and contribution to the arts and society. Studies also show that arts interventions of intergenerational nature may be a method to lessen age stereotypes among both the young and the old. Yes, perceptions and minds must be changed. So a very big thank you to you, Rita, for the hard work and doing all that is necessary to build the viewing room. I have no clue what goes into it. And then I also want to thank each of you, the panelists and the audience once again. It is really miraculous that we can connect in this way while we are fighting COVID. So good luck to everybody, and please come back and see us, see the new exhibition, and come back to the next 2 panels.